Beard, thanks for joining us. Whoa, that's a lot of things. I'm going to call you Dolphin Monkey. That's what I'm going to do. Hey, Dolphin Monkey, thanks for joining us. What up? All right. Well, yeah. Well, we'll go ahead and get started with today's show. So today we're not going to talk about budgeting. We're not going to talk about anything specific to personal finance unless anybody has any questions. What I am going to do is I'm going to talk about retail and kind of the last couple decades. We're also going to talk about stores that have opened and closed, or stores that have just flat out closed. We're going to talk about some of the effects that have gone on with retail over the last couple decades. And we're going to see if some of the information that we've uncovered is going to help us kind of predict maybe what is going to happen with retail in the near term future. Honest, thanks for joining us. And the hope is that all of us kind of come away with something when it comes to retail and how we should interact with it moving forward. There's a lot of there's a lot of things out there that are constantly trying to suggest to us how we should interact with retail, where we should buy, where our loyalties should remain, or where they should go to and divert to. And a lot of that is done on the retailer side. A lot of it's not done with forethought as far as how we should really be spending our dollars. So let's talk about that a little bit today. I think what we'll start off with is a little bit of numbers. So with retail, it's kind of a wide spattering of companies when you think of the types of companies that are involved in retail. And, you know, a trip down memory lane can really help us in this space. For quite a few of us, we came up as probably part of the mall generation. You know, every generation has multiple layers to the kinds of things that they were constantly exposed to or were relevant to their upbringing. And so for a lot of us, and I know I'm included in this, thank you for the cherries. The mall space really speaks to us, right? If you were in the 70s, 80s, 90s, heck, if you were in the 60s, the malls really spoke to your experience in your teen years, and you know, even moving forward into your 20s. So apparel, shoe companies, furniture stores, jewelers, massive amounts of commercially produced food in the form of sandwiches, hot dogs, Chinese food, soft drinks galore, movie theaters. These are all things that make up the retail sector when it comes to how Wall Street evaluates companies and categorizes them. And so it's kind of a surprise and not surprise that this week, the biggest gainer, for example, was AMC Entertainment Holdings. This is a company that's been circling the drain for probably the past decade. And a lot of us are familiar with AMC because for a long time, they were buying out movie theaters at shopping malls for eons and eons and eons. And they seem to be the big dog on the street when it came to the openings of movies across the country. But a lot of that has changed. A a lot of that has changed as far as how they get media into their theaters and what kind of media they get into their theaters. And so consequently, they've been losing market share. And, bankruptcy is something that they have been flirting with for probably the last decade, on again, off again. They were also a meme stock at Wall Street Bets. If you're a follower of the things that go on Reddit, Wall Street Bets, which is a subreddit over there, touted AMC pretty loudly, almost as loudly as they did GameStop. It just their magic on GameStop was a little bit more substantial, and that's in part because of the specifics around how what was going on with GameStop worked. But GameStop's a retailer just the same. But AMC gained nearly 6% this week, and that puts them at about number 8 on the list this week of top gainers. But it does make them the number 1 retail gain on the week. They gained 9 cents, so they're up to $1.66 a share. So this is not a great company to invest in by any means. I mean, $1.66 tells me, especially when they were at a high of like 157 at one point years ago, that tells me that they're not doing well. And we all know that they're not doing well, but there's just a lot of fodder around them these days. So, potentially they're going to be, up and down, and they might be a top gainer again at some point this year. You never know. After that, Fast Retailing Company was another one. You invested in Meet Me at $3. Okay. Fast Retailing Company Ltd, which is out of Great Britain, is the number 2 retail leader this week. They went up almost 4%, gaining 91 cents to $24.53 to finish out the week. And then after that, it's just another spattering of other companies in spaces like metals and things like that. And I can't really filter out for many more retailers. But what that tells me is that retail was kind of having a slush week and probably more of a loss than anything. And that seems to be the space that retail finds itself in. I didn't scan any losers just because I could tell by the gainers that retail was going to be kind of a problem this week. And like I said, those numbers really did prove it to me. Lionsgate, for example, which is a movie studio, but they have retail components to their piece. They lost 5% on the week. Peloton, which is definitely a retailer, they lost 5 1/3 on the week, down 54 cents, all the way down to $9.58 a share. You may recall Peloton was up north of $200 a share during the peak of COVID. That just goes to show you how flat that they fell. And what was interesting about this is that it shows really the problem with retail in today's economy is that retail doesn't really have a good strong hold on consumers. As much money is spent on advertisement, as much money is spent on marketing and marketing research. These companies are fighting hard to get your dollar, but they're kind of doing it blindly because they don't seem to know how to capture us. The trick with retail isn't making a sale; it's turning the sale to you the one time into 10 more sales down the line. They're having a hard time converting us. A lot of us are shopping 1 or 2 times at a location, and we're not going back. I would say that there's a couple of different reasons why that's going on, and my theory is that part of it is there's a number of people who are informed shoppers, and they're simply shopping when discounts exist. If the discount doesn't exist, they're not shopping there. They're going to shop somewhere else instead. They're loyal to the discount. They're not loyal to anything else. Most retailers will place stuff on an arbitrary discount as a way to get you in the store, and the idea is to get you to buy other things while you're there. But it seems like people are just shopping for the discount, and they're not doing much more. This type of shopping is typical in what would be considered down years. I'm not going to say the D word, depression, because that's not where we're at. But recession, that's typically the type of shopping we see during a recession. But while retail has been considered to be up and up and up throughout COVID, I think what we saw was just a lot of people shopping because they had nothing else better to do online. And that's why a lot of these companies actually have stronger online footprints now than they do space in a store. And we'll go over a couple of reasons why that's going on. But our lead story is about a company called Bonton. Anybody here familiar with Bonton? Or is it Bonton? Bon, I don't know. It's a British slang term that they used, and we'll talk about that history here in a little bit. Judging from the chat, I'm going to assume that nobody is familiar with Bonton. Yeah, I don't. Okay. So Bonton is a company that actually started a long time ago. And a big company decided to actually start a war with them. And it was kind of an incidental war. They started a war with them, but they didn't realize they were warring with them specifically. And Bonton didn't realize that somebody had created a war with them before it was too late. So for those that don't know, Bonton was a large department store that originates from Sam Grumbacher and Son, which was a market space in York, Pennsylvania. Now, this was started back in the late 1800s in York, Pennsylvania. What Grumbacher started was a shop that was a millinery. And for those that don't know what a millinery is, that is a hat manufacturing store. So this is a shop that you go into and they actually make hats for you. So derby hats, pork pie hats, fedoras, all the way up to all the fancy hats that you see women wear to like the Kentucky Derby, or with matching outfits for that matter. Millinery is the place where they design and put together custom hats like this. So Grumbacher started a millinery, but what he also did was make space in his store to hold dry goods. So, staples that you might have seen in somebody's pantry during this era of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Flour, sugar, beans, starches, things like that. So you have these two very different products going on in this space, but that was not terribly unheard of during that time when retail establishments were first getting a foothold. And so sometimes it was just a matter of you had access to a wholesaler in one space and you had access to materials in another, and you just opened up a shop and you did both things. That was not unheard of in the late 19th century and even the early 20th century. So that's not all that crazy. By 1902, Grumbacher expanded his hat making enterprise into Trenton, New Jersey. She Ready, thanks for joining us. And so he had two locations. Thank you for the love, Bear. Two locations in Trenton, New Jersey, which at the time was and still is, of course, the state capital of New Jersey, but it was a budding metropolitan area at the time. Trenton was kind of hedged off since then, but it was becoming a big city at the time. And he had two locations there. He had his one original in York, but the two locations in Trenton were so profitable that it was leading to him being able to expand. A quick note on the term Bonton, because he originally started as Grumbacher and Son, but he quickly changed the name in the New Jersey stores to Bonton, which was a British term, slang term, meaning elite or high society. And so that was what he named his stores. And while many U.S. businesses struggled towards the time that World War I started, in part because of rationing, and also into the ensuing years, which was the going into the Roaring '20s, which was a very hot market, and then going into the Great Depression, Grumbacher was actually able to maintain a very steady financial foothold. Amy, thank you for joining us. And so he was able to expand his store footprint into numerous parts of Pennsylvania. He was mainly focused in the eastern portion of the state, of course, being in York, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of Baltimore and about an hour and a half west of Philadelphia. So he started in a lot of communities in southeast Pennsylvania, but then started expanding into central Pennsylvania, into places like Altoona and Carlisle. And quickly was able to actually purchase other stores. Irely's, for example, in Hagerstown, Maryland. And Hagerstown, Maryland is actually a major retail trading point, and was at the time and still remains to this day. If you've ever been to Hagerstown, Maryland, they have a major outlet shopping center there, and it's huge, even for outlet mall standards. It's very huge. And so consequently, those stores, he started collecting, kept the names in place, and then over time, he started changing out the names at places that weren't doing as well, as a way to keep promoting his brand. He also purchased out another family business known as McMeans. That's McMeen. They had locations in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, for example. And then he just wiped out the brand name and kept his going. Moving forward to the 1960s, Bon-Ton was expanding into West Virginia at this point. They were opening Irely's locations in West Virginia because they were finding that name actually played better in some of these outlying regions that they were expanding to, rather than their Bon-Ton brand. So Grumbacher and by this point his son and grandson were running the business, and they were finding that when it came to branding, especially from a regional approach like they had, some names worked in certain places. Bon-Ton, meaning elite, played really well on the Atlantic coast, like Trenton, New Jersey, where they first started that, but it didn't play so well as they moved further west into West Virginia. So they kept these different brands going, and obviously they incorporated a management LLC that just held over all these different brands that they had. And by the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they saw even more expansion by this point, pretty much taking over every major retail location you could think of in Pennsylvania, and then also expanding into New York and Massachusetts. But it was also during this time that Bon-Ton started having problems. Lucky, thank you for joining us. Thank you for the 100. They started having problems maintaining their original store structures. And so Bon-Ton was shuttering stores, like mainly in their flagship locations, like in York, Pennsylvania, because a lot of the stores they had by this point were actually in malls. As they continued buying out different brands of stores that were related to them, they were finding that more and more of the locations of these stores were specifically found in malls and strip malls that were surrounded by malls, rather than in traditional store locations like they had on main business districts in York and other locations. So from there, they started really focusing on brand locations that were found in malls. And they treated these buyouts as kind of a turnkey solution to either expanding their Bon-Ton brand or keeping Irely's or some other brands in place that they were already managing. For some reason, as the early 2000s came around, Bon-Ton started losing money on their balance sheet. And a big glaring example came when they lost, or where they reported a loss of $1.7 million over the third quarter of 2003. This was obviously 2003, for those that don't know, was right at the tail end of the dot-com bubble, where dot-com businesses burst. And so there were some that survived and there was a lot that didn't. And so by 2003, a lot of businesses that did survive the dot-com bubble were finding ways to actually expand themselves, to keep themselves even more relevant, because they started finding that if they did survive, that meant that their brand had value. And if your brand has value, you've got to find ways to maintain your brand. And so sometimes you get yourself into stuff that wasn't part of the original structure. And so Amazon, for example, is one of the dot-com companies that absolutely survived. And we know all too well how Amazon is doing as I read this story. Most of the loss in that particular quarterly report that Bon-Ton issued was attributed to what's known as asset impairment. And what asset impairment is when you hold an asset on your balance sheet and you report it at a particular value, But upon further inspection, usually by an outside party, like let's say a company that sets bond ratings, they look at those assets and they go, well, wait a minute, you're saying that this asset is worth $50 million, but as we're inspecting it, it's really only worth 15. That's a major loss. You're talking $35 million right off of your balance sheet. Now, why that's important for a business is normally businesses have debt, and that debt is tied to assets. So if they have an asset that was originally structured to be valued at $50 million, and then it loses that value upon further inspection by a third-party company, that means that whatever debt is tied to that particular asset is now, for one, going to be much harder to clear off of their balance sheet, because now that debt means that they have way more debt than what they originally anticipated. And two, what if they've tied debt specifically to that asset can no longer sustain that debt in the way that it was originally structured in the deal. That typically means that whoever's holding that debt is going to expect payments at a higher rate of interest, because the asset tied to the debt isn't going to cover the debt. So now they want their money back, and they want it at a faster clip with interest, because now they don't trust that the asset is going to balance them out. And in this particular report, what I found interesting was the loss. Hi, Mandy. Thanks for joining us. The loss that Bonton was actually describing was 11 cents per share that they had out on the open market. 10 cents of that 11 cents was directly tied to asset impairment. So I think we can see right away where there's a problem with this company. They're overvaluing the assets that they have, most likely the brands that they've purchased. And then on top of that, they have probably put themselves into a major position with debt, because as we can clearly see just by the little bit that we've discussed, they're trying to buy out other companies that they, for one, find to be competition, but two, are complementary to the footprint that they already have as a retailer, which for Bonton, it was mainly shoes, apparel, and large items such as furniture and appliances. We talked about the 10 cents, excuse me. Exactly 2 years after that particular report came out to investors, Bonton chose to make their largest expansion yet. They doubled their stores by purchasing 142 stores that were owned by Saks Northern Department Group. And those stores included Carson Pirie Scott, which they rebranded to Carson's, Bergner's, which is Brgners, Boston Store, Herberger's, and Yonkers. Yonkers is spelled Younkers. This was done at a cost of $1.1 billion. And then a year later, they purchased several stores from Belk, which were not named Belk, but were stores that were more close to stores that Bonton owned geographically, and Belk was all too interested in getting rid of those. Hey, M1K, thanks for joining us. So consequently, what we're seeing here is a company that's taking on probably a lot of debt in order to make purchases that they seem to think are key to their business model, which at this point, as we can tell just by what they're doing, is taking over complementary businesses that kind of help them hedge themselves out further geographically. And I think what the strategy is here is the more stores that we own in more areas, the more customers we're going to get. And that's a basic tenet to having physical stores, but it doesn't always work that way. And so one of the scary things about that is you're talking about a company that employs thousands of people, and you've probably got 20 people up at the top they've got this very oversimplified strategy for what it's going to take for them to survive. And clearly it's not working, and they're dedicating more and more debt to it. And so consequently, what's going to happen is people are going to lose their livelihood. Again, some of these recent purchases that we're talking about here in this last part, they removed quite a bit of that branding, and they substituted others that they had existing instead. Now, around this time, after this last purchase from Belk, which I believe, I didn't write it down here, but I believe it was 2006 was when they made this purchase from Belk. Amazon started becoming more entrenched in the end client delivery. So if we remember Amazon's history, they had first started as a book service. So you would order books from them and they would ship that. That was a test that Jeff Bezos put together for his company. He started with books because it was easy inventory to have and it was easy enough to mail through the United States Postal Service by media rate, which was what he specialized in to begin with. But he started doing smaller items, lower end jewelry. Thank you for the love, Bear. He started doing things like little trinkets. He started doing things like, certain household goods. Hey, Secret 96, thanks for joining us. And so he started expanding this end client delivery service known as Prime at the same point on the East Coast, where Bon-Ton had a lot of their stores, the Northeast and the Upper Midwest. The struggle for Amazon up to this point in their business model was the finer logistics around shipping larger items like furniture and appliances, apparel and shoes. And these were things that Bon-Ton was very good at in their retail space. But Amazon indirectly took on Bon-Ton when they made a particular purchase of their own. On July 2009, Amazon bought out Zappos.com. Anybody here do business with Zappos? I think one time I bought shoes from them, and it was actually, the way it worked for me was I was shopping for shoes on Amazon because I'd been told about it, and then they offered me shoes through Zappos through the Amazon website. Yeah, you've heard of, yeah. And Zappos is actually a really well-regarded company with their customer base. Zappos is famous for having a CEO. I can't remember his name. He was a young man who has since passed away, and which is unfortunate. But he encouraged his employees to talk on the phone forever with customers and take notes. And they learned a lot of stuff from those notes about customers and the things that they wanted and the things that they valued. And they constantly catered their online business to customers and the wants and needs that they spoke about with their customer service reps. They encouraged long phone conversations. Yeah, in a sense. And they also were willing to pick up the tab on returns. And that's where Amazon got the idea of expanding their business by doing free returns. And so Amazon started taking in these ideas from Zappos after they acquired them, and they applied it to their own business. And they did it with their own shoe department, which they've since subsequently handed over to Zappos full time now. So Zappos just handles all the shoes for Amazon. That's my understanding. I didn't fact check that before saying it, but that's the research that I did that suggests that Zappos has taken over all that. But then what Amazon figured out right away was, if we can do these sorts of things with shoes and that has such an impact with customers, we can certainly do it with apparel. And that's exactly what they've done. And then since then, by their own methods, they've been able to figure out how to ship the larger items to people through Amazon's third-party delivery service, because they weren't able to do that through the Postal Service. All of this waged war with Bon-Ton, who was already in a really bad spot. They were buying out stores that predominantly were found in shopping malls. Shopping malls were having more and more problems keeping retail traffic in their places, and Amazon was just becoming a bigger monster in the retail space that shopping malls absolutely survived and thrived off of: shoes, apparels, and appliances. By 2011, the wheels were falling off for Bon-Ton. They began closing stores. That year, they closed 42 in total. And then by 2018, after they'd gone through a bond rating in 2016 by Standard & Poor's, which put them at the riskiest level of bond rating, and also in their notes, thank you for the dividend, they claimed that Bon-Ton was, one bad move away from having to go through a bankruptcy or some kind of debt restructuring. 2 years later, that's exactly what happened with Bon-Ton. 2018 came, they went into Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceedings and then closed all their stores immediately, which was in total was 267. And then after going through bankruptcy, they sold the business, or what remained of it after bankruptcy, to a company called BrandX.com. BrandX.com takes over old brands that still have some kind of value and name recognition, which that's where a brand gets its value from, is name recognition. And what they do is they turn them into an online format, and then they try and use that as a way to capture whatever existing customer base remains after a bankruptcy. They've done this with about 30 different brands themselves. They're quite successful in doing it. And at this point, Bon-Ton, as an online structure for retail, they say they're doing well. Now, here's the thing. When you own stores, right, you've got either you own it and you have property taxes and you've got utility bills that are associated with that. Perhaps you have some kind of debt on the building itself and the land that you're having to pay. But if you're in a retail mall, most likely you're on a lease. So you have a lease that you have to pay on top of utilities. And typically in a mall structure, if you have a problem inside the space that you're leasing, most of that is on you for repair. So consequently, what happened with Bon-Ton transitioning to an online format is all those bills went away. They also don't have as many employees. They have one location that people do their shopping from. You have your little online cart. They have a warehouse full of stuff. They inventory all that stuff in, and then you order from them and it ships off to you. And then they use whatever shipper, be it UPS, FedEx, Postal Service, or any of the other ones that specialize in the large item delivery. And sometimes they even contract that out to a third party that's closer to whatever area you're in. So if that online retailer, for example, has a bunch of people in Michigan that are buying refrigerators and microwaves, rather than have stuff ship out from their location, which is in New York, Brand X is located in New York, they may very well contract with some warehouse space up in Michigan to just have that inventory on hand. And then that warehouse has contract delivery services that just bring it to your doorstep or bring it inside for you and set it up. That seems to be a more successful business model for all these companies that find themselves in this problem where they've battled Amazon to the umpteenth degree, or they were almost exclusively found in shopping mall spaces, and these shopping malls have run out of customers, or they don't have the same customer base that they once did. DMAC, thanks for joining us. I think the lesson learned from Bon-Ton is really a lesson that a lot of retail companies have taught us here in the last 20 years. And that's oversaturating yourself as a means to end competition is not really a strong strategy whatsoever. Sometimes it's better to just stay home and fix what's going on in your backyard rather than trying to push out the front door and build a big light show that everybody can see out front. But you've got a bunch of potholes out back. Abdul Rahman, thanks for joining us. What we find a lot of times with these retail companies is that they've got a lot of skeletons in their corporate offices, mistakes that have been made, and they're not dealing with those things, or at least they didn't. And then consequently, it comes out on the balance sheet later, and it becomes a bigger problem later for them. Bon-Ton was a company that it started off really small and had a very specific purpose, but as it got bigger and bigger, the only answer was to get bigger and bigger. But sometimes getting bigger and bigger is just empty. There's nothing real tangible to it. And so, a family business that worked really well and played really well in the area it was at got into a space that it really didn't know what to do with itself. And it just started doing more of the same. And unfortunately, it killed it. And also not preparing for something like online businesses becoming more of a thing for consumers rather than the physical space that a shopping mall provides. Jasmine, thanks for joining us. This story is not all that unique. We've all read these stories with other companies, and it's sad to think about, but at the same time, maybe the retail space was just oversaturated. Maybe there just wasn't enough space for all of them, and maybe that was what killed them. Probably should have thought about that. Thank you for the dividends. Now, one of the things I talked about in the run-up to this show was store closures and store openings. And I've got a list of a lot of major stores. In fact, as I was going through this list, it was so exhaustive, it got to a point where I really just couldn't capture all the lists of store closings that have happened in the last decade. Dark Phoenix, thanks for joining us. But we start our store closures list with Bed Bath & Beyond. They're on pace to close 416 stores this year alone. They're still generating profits, believe it or not. The problem is that inflation is tearing into their revenue. So as much as they're making money, they're just not able to sustain profit because the stuff that they're purchasing continues to cost more to, one, purchase, and two, to store. And then by the time they sell it on the back end, they're facing debt that they simply can't cover. They have a different set of stores that some people are not aware of called Bye Bye Baby. They've closed 120 of those, and it seems like that particular part of their business is actually going to fold out here even before they go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings, which they keep hinting at as a possibility. They've not committed to it yet, but they are definitely circling the drain. And closing this amount of stores definitely suggests that that's where it's headed. We've talked about Bed Bath & Beyond before, that when it comes to setting themselves up as an online business, they have just lacked in that, and they waited way too long to get themselves there, and they're not positioned correctly for it. And the other thing is they've relied too heavily on their generic blue coupons as a way to get people into their stores. It does work, but it doesn't work as well as it needs to. And so consequently, that's what's costing them customer base, is that they're just committed themselves to very old tactics that, the company started with, and they've done nothing to improve upon them. Foot Locker is our next on the list. By 2026, they are claiming that they will shut down 545 stores. Joe Daddy, thanks for joining us. This includes 125 Champ Sports locations, which they own, in case you weren't aware. They also plan to open 300 concept stores at the same time that they're doing all these closings. These stores that they're opening that they call concept stores are going to be outside of mall spaces. So Foot Locker may be coming to a strip mall near you, maybe coming to a neighborhood space near you. We're not too sure what they're going to be doing, but they call them concept stores. They've specifically said they're going to be outside of shopping malls, that they're trying to divest themselves of the shopping mall experience that they are so intrinsically linked to. So we'll see what happens with that, but for sure that they're going to be closing over 500 stores by 2026, and some of that's already underway. Tuesday Morning, the very famous discount store that I think a lot of people are aware of, has closed 265 stores as of January 30th this year. So that didn't take them too long. I mean, that started in Q4 of last year and moves forward this year. It's more than half of their stores in total. They are in Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings as we read this. Bath & Body Works is closing 50 mall stores, but they're adding 90 standalone stores, and they're remodeling 25. Bath & Body Works actually does have pretty good, strong revenue coming in, but the problem is that they're in shopping malls, and shopping malls just simply don't get the foot traffic that they used to. Gap and Banana Republic is closing 46 stores across both brands this year. Walmart has announced that they're closing 22 stores this year. Alpha Queer, thank you for joining us. With 2 of their pickup-only locations, the only 2 in existence, they're going to be closing those down too. Those simply are not performing the way that they expected, and they're not going to even bother continuing with that concept. That means that 20 stores nationwide are going to close. Now, Walmart has a little bit of a different reason why they're closing some of these stores. They have noted in the general press release on these store closures that some of them are being closed because of underperformance. A lot of that is tied to shoplifting. So with Walmart, it is specifically that they're closing in locations where shoplifting has gotten to be too costly for their insurance. And so insurance is dictating where they can actually have stores open. And so that's the issue there. Party City. Now, this was announced back in February. Was an interesting story then. We didn't talk about it. But Party City is closing 22 stores, and they also are filing for bankruptcy. Vic, thanks for joining us. Now, part of the thing with Party City going into bankruptcy with actual stores open, although they don't have very many open, they believe that there might be an interest in another company coming in, taking over the brand, maybe rebranding, and holding on to certain key locations. I don't think that exists. I think that maybe Brand X or one of these other companies that comes in and buys what we call delinquent brands would be interested in purchasing it, but they're going to do an online format with it inevitably. I don't think they're necessarily going to have storefronts. Now, the thing with Party City is it's a location where you go in and you purchase or you lease out items that you are going to have for some kind of event. And they're pretty good in that space. I've heard nothing but good things in terms of them working with customers that have, very specific needs. Yeah. Party City is kind of a shocker because out my way, the youngins love Party City. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You go there to purchase things for different types of events and things like that. But I think that they have some large items that it wouldn't make sense to put those into an online format. So what you might see is Party City getting into the logistics game and getting trucks to perhaps deliver some of those larger items from contracted warehouse space. So that's another thing that might happen with some of these online formatted stores, or the ones that are impending an online format, is they might start getting into kind of logistics space with some of their items. Best Buy is closing 30 stores this year. They claim that they're going to be opening up 10 outlets and 8 smaller formatted stores. Best Buy has said that they are interested in opening up smaller stores rather than kind of the big size that they've done in the past. The smaller stores focus on a certain group of brands. I'm guessing that those brands are paying a premium to be footed that way by Best Buy. And then on top of it, they're just going to focus, on, I think, a dozen different spaces within retail electronics. So probably gone by the wayside is appliances for Best Buy, or they might stay in that space. I heard that they do have an interest in trying to get a foothold on smart devices for the home. So appliances, again, might fit into that space just because there are appliances that are considered smart and would be part of a overall apparatus in a home that you run from your phone. Thank you for the Springbird. They don't have any announcements as far as dates that they're going to open those stores, however. So it's not even sure that Best Buy is actually committed to opening stores, but they've said that they plan to. Amazon is on this list as well. They're going to close a bunch of their Amazon Fresh locations. This is their grocery store concept where they were trying to actually focus on grocery delivery and open up grocery locations that would kind of hub for that experience. Amazon found that they just simply don't have the money to keep that going and make it successful. And so they're just going to close the whole thing down. They're also closing down 8 of their Go locations. Now, I'm not familiar with what the Go locations are, but I suspect that these are locations where you can have packages dropped off and you pick up there. And then what Amazon does is they feature different types of products in there. And what it is companies that want their products featured have to pay a premium to do so. So again, we're seeing a lot of this kind of quasi retail come up now, where actually the companies that want their products sold in a physical space are having to pay a premium to do so. I assure you that those companies will pass that cost on to you, rest assured. Big Lots is closing 7 stores. They're pivoting towards small towns. Now, with Big Lots, what's going on is they saw what Dollar General is doing by going into the smallest of communities. Um, and they're getting themselves away from coastline and getting themselves into Midwest locations and Southwest locations and Southeast locations, and even Northeast locations that are away from the coast. And that's what they're doing, is they're just focusing on the smallest communities possible. So if you live in a small town, Big Lots might be coming your way. Macy's is planning on closing 125 stores over the next 3 years. 4 this year, 1 in California, 1 in Colorado, 1 in Hawaii, and 1 in Maryland. So they're Macy's has been closing stores, I believe, for the last 15 years, and that doesn't seem to be letting up. Macy's continues to close stores as a way to hedge against filing for bankruptcy. But King Yeti, thanks for joining us. But it does seem like no matter how long Macy's carries on, they continue to face bankruptcy issues, no matter how many stores they do close. Target is closing 4, but they're opening 20. And Target is another one, like Walmart, where they're closing stores based on criminal behavior going on in certain locations. So if the shoplifting is hitting the top end of their insurance policy and the insurance company is saying your premiums are going to go way up if you continue in these locations, they're basically closing those stores, getting out of there, and then finding other places to open up stores. With Target and Walmart, I don't think you're going to ever see those stores lose too much of a foothold on the space that they have. I think that David, thank you for the favorite. I think that what you'll find is that they found a way to coexist with Amazon, and obviously it's competitive. But I think that what you'll find is Target and Walmart they're not going to go anywhere. They're here to stay for the remaining, or for the foreseeable future, excuse me. And what we'll see, I don't know, maybe 100 years from now, and hopefully none of us will see it. I don't want to live that long, but if it, 100 years from now, if there's another revolution in the retail space, maybe then Target and Walmart will face more dire circumstances. But for the time being, they're fine. They're strong. And if they are closing stores, it's not because they're doing bad. It's because they're dealing with something else there that is not normal. So JCPenney, they have 2 locations left. I researched this. They've closed 150 locations since 2020. I don't think 2 locations left is correct. That's the thing. I read that, but I don't think that's right, because I can think of 2 locations that JCPenney still exists in my area. I think what they meant when I read that presser, because some of these pressers that I read were really written poorly, I think what they were talking about was that JCPenney might be opening up 2 locations. But really what it is they've lost a lot of stores. We know that they're losing a lot of stores. And they're another one like Bonton that kind of focuses on appliances and apparel as their flagship. And the problem is there's just too many options when it comes to those things now, And again, with appliances, you start talking about smart appliances in a space. And unless you're willing to offer all the smart apparatuses for all these things to kind of coexist and be part of the same bubble, you're just not going to be successful in that space. Best Buy proves it time and time again. And JCPenney is no different. I don't suspect that they're going to survive all that much longer. The fact that they're closing that many stores all at once tells you that, that's going to be a continuing cycle. And at some point, we'll hear the end of JCPenney. Fun fact, there's a store on here that exists that everybody thinks is shut down completely. I can hardly wait to tell you about it. It's coming up in the list. Express, which is a fashion store, they are down to 8 stores, 2 which are outlets. I looked that up on their website. That is factual. 8 stores exist for Express at this point. They don't have much market share left. Their stores are kind of in random places. It seems like with Express, what they've done is they've held on to stores that generate the most revenue, and they've been paring down ones that have smaller and smaller revenue breaks. So the ones that exist apparently are the ones that drive the most revenue for them. Not sure how that happened, but that's where it's at. Office Depot still has a ton of stores, but back in 2021, They made a big Siren. Thanks for joining us. They made a big pivot during quarterly reports to investors where they said they were going to pivot away from the retail space that they exist in and go to an IT services model where they served online and then had stationary points throughout the country where their IT specialists would hub from and then come out to locations and serve those people. Now, the thing of it is, the IT services that they talked about involved printing, involved component installation, and involved network guidance. These are all things that they offer from their retail spaces already. So it doesn't seem like it's that much of a big pivot. And I'm not even sure why they would have even mentioned that other than to say they're not going to have any more retail goods. If you've ever been to an Office Depot, they have gummy bears up at the checkout. So I guess that's what's going away. I'm not sure what they meant by it. It's really confusing. Steinmart has closed all locations during COVID. So if you were a Steinmart customer and you haven't been to one recently, that's why. They shut down all of their locations. They operate online only, and since then they've claimed that their revenue has never been better. But again, being an online only business gets you out of a lot of capital expenses. So that revenue can be a lot less than what you were making before, and you can afford to have it that way because you just don't have the same expenses that you once did, including employees. Walgreens has announced that they are going to close worldwide operations. So all their space internationally is going to shut down. And as far as their US stores are concerned, it's not going to be too long till you see those shutting down too. The pharmacy space has been dominated by CVS in a number of different ways, and CVS purchasing an insurance company, a pharmaceutical company, and several smaller medical practices, and they'll probably continue buying medical practices, have basically created a medical ecosystem that all these other pharmacies can't compete with, nor do they have the capital to do so. So the likes of Rite Aid are probably going to go away over the next 10 years. Walgreens, maybe sooner than that. And some local pharmacies are probably going to feel the impact from this too. Mark my words. Men's Warehouse plans to close 500 stores this year. 500. Where are you going to go to buy your kid's suit for prom or your kid's dress for prom? What about wedding parties, right? Where are you going to go for all that? Signet Jewelers, which owns Zales, Kay, and Jared, they're closing over 150 stores this year. They plan on closing another 150 the following year. I don't think they have that many stores to begin with. We might be seeing the end of retail jewelers. Elf Cosmetics in 2020 shut down all of their physical stores and they went online. And it's another company that claims that going online, it's never been better. They're doing fantastic now that they're on an online model, and they're looking forward to keeping on with that process. Anybody here remember Pier 1? Pier 1 went online in 2020, but now they're talking about filing for bankruptcy again. They shut down all their stores prior to 2020, and then they went to an online model, and within a year of doing so, the numbers were worse than ever before. I don't know about Pier 1 specifically. I've been to that store as a child. My parents bought some wicker furniture there once. But for some reason, people just don't trust that store. I think it's a combination of really exorbitantly high prices and lackluster inventory. I think that's what gets them in trouble. But they're not going to exist here pretty soon, so you don't have to worry about it, right? Winn-Dixie, which is a grocery chain for those of you that are unaware, mainly in the Southeast, they're down to 546 stores now. They had over 3,000 at one point, and they were reaching themselves into the Northeast and the North Central states. But they've been hit pretty hard. They've been known as a major store to go to for beef products for a very long time, just because of their relationships with ranches and butchers. But that's not been enough for them to keep their grocery chains up and running. And so consequently, they are losing quite a bit of space. 460 of the stores that remain are all in Florida. They have 39 in Alabama, 28 in Louisiana, 12 in Georgia, and 7 in Mississippi. Animal Lover, thanks for joining us. That kind of undersaturation and oversaturation is just going to lead to more closures. I predict that the 7 stores in Mississippi will be closed by the end of next year. GameStop still has well over 4,000 stores worldwide, with nearly 3,000 in the US. They keep saying that they're going to close down stores and go to a more online model, but they don't seem to be doing it. These stores continue to exist no matter what. So I don't know what they're planning on doing, but if they do something, it's probably going to be a very big thing. It's not going to be something small where they close a few hundred a year. They're probably going to close like 1,000. They found a way, did they? They found the way. If anybody's familiar with Justice, which is a little girls' clothing store, they've closed all locations. They've gone online. They also claim that going online has been the saving grace for them. Sears. Nebula, thanks for joining us. Sears, 17 stores remain. No more auto centers. All their hometown stores have been liquidated and shuttered. Now, you guys may remember, Sears owns Kmart. Does anybody here know what happened with Kmart? I'm going to talk about Kmart right now. Kmart, people think that Kmart doesn't exist anymore. And if you were on the West Coast, that would be a very good conclusion to reach. But guess what? They have 3 locations. Anybody guess where they're at? I'm gonna move rooms now because I'm taking up too much time here. And Jay, you can cut off the recording at this point. I'm gonna go well past an hour today. All right, so the 3 locations that Kmart owns still. Miami, Florida. That's right, they've got one in Miami, Florida. Westwood, New Jersey, and Bridgehampton, New York. Bridgehampton, New York is a community way out on the east end of Long Island. I don't know how you serve those 3 stores. I mean, the 2 up in the Northeast, in New Jersey and New York, logistically, it would be easy to serve those 2 stores, but to have one all the way down in Miami, I'm not sure how you serve that store. Glock, thanks for joining us. But I'm going to issue you guys a challenge. If you go on Google Maps and you look up locations for Kmart, you'll find the 3 that still exist. What's interesting about that is normally when you go on Google Maps, most of the pictures that you'll find in a retail space are from the outside and at the doorways. But somebody went to the trouble in a couple of these locations of doing full 3D walkouts of the aisles of the Kmarts that still exist. It's interesting to look at those store shelves, folks. I'm not sure how those stores still exist. I don't know why they still exist, but they do exist. Disney closed over 100 stores in the last year. You may recall that Disney at one point was expanding their retail space, trying to sell more of their branded and character-based trinkets and toys and everything else that they've got going on. Sorry, I'm losing the words for the stuff that they sell. But they decided to close those because they're just underperforming. Imagine that. You imagine if, shoplifting is in bulk at Walmart is popular, certainly shoplifting at Disney would be, and more importantly, spending at Disney wouldn't be. Zara, which is a Spanish retailer of fashion, worldwide recognized fashion, in 2021 appeared that they were going to need to shutter their whole business. Yep, you still have one in Florida. It's in Miami. It is in Miami. But they managed to get themselves out of it, and they still have 2,000 locations worldwide. Now, this is an interesting thing about stores that focus on the international space and not on U.S. markets. Internationally, people still like to go out and shop. I guess it's a life experience or something for some reason. And so consequently, these people still value going and walking down to some location and shopping. In fact, in some of the developing islands in the Caribbean, downtown shopping districts is becoming a thing. Now, they used to have downtown shopping districts, but they were a little bit more antiquated and not designed for tourists. But a lot of developing Caribbean countries are actually focused on building strip malls and that sort of thing along their main streets now. Quite interesting how that works out. H&M has over 4,000 stores, but they closed nearly 400 during the pandemic. They closed stores in Russia and Belarus thanks to the activity in the Ukraine. Um, Lowe's is also on our list of companies facing bankruptcy. And that's something I need you to know while I'm talking about all these different stores. These are all stores that are recently faced bankruptcy or are facing bankruptcy. Um, Lowe's decided to sell off all of their operations in Canada and Australia in response to facing bankruptcy because specifically Home Depot has them backed up against the ropes in the boxing ring. That is the fight between handyman stores, as I like to call them. And Home Depot's whooping that butt. Victoria's Secret, there's too much confusion in any of their reports, but I will tell you that's not a good sign. They claimed in 2021 to have 775 stores, but as of 2021, it's been noted that they have 250. So they definitely did a lot of store closing, but their quarterlies just simply didn't announce closures the way that normally stores would. And they would report their bad numbers, but then they would put all this fluff in about, oh, well, but this is better. And, this actually means this. When companies that are publicly traded are doing weird stuff like that in the reporting, get away from them. Get away from them as fast as you can. Manifest, thanks for joining. Forever 21, they have 415 stores in the U.S. Right now, but they did state that all stores were going to close in 2022, which has not happened. So Forever 21 still has locations open, but at any moment they're going to close. They've been pretty serious about doing the online only model, and I'm going to talk about the online